So this is a recording on valuation of a business. One of the assignments for Max Inc. Part D and D1 had to do with if you had to value how much is this company worth, how would you do that? And so what I'd like to do is to provide you some feedback as far as how would you do it. There are multiple ways to do it. I am going to refer to the book that you all have and have read through your prior reading assignments, The Business Valuation Demystified. In this lecture, I would be discussing how do you value business using the discounted cash flow methodology, which is chapter 5 in the book. And in the book, so what I have done here is I have taken copies of a couple of the pages, but anyways, the reference is chapter 5 in Business Valuation Demystified, and the chapter 5 starts at page 61. So the valuation methodology called the discounted cash flow. And the discounted cash flow DCF is the same thing as present value. So in the prior lectures and the prior learnings, you have all learned about net present value, NPV, and we've talked about the IRR. So NPV is basically we are netting, which means we sum up all the present value. And if you recall, the way we were doing the present value is if we were looking at, let's say, in the year 2016, and we had, say, $100,000, and if we want to know what is it worth today, present value, we would divide that by 1, I'll put in the parentheses, 1 plus R, which is the discount rate that we're discounting the business, and we raise it to N, depending upon how far 2016 is from current year. So this process, as you recall, is called discounting, which means we are using a discount rate of R. We're looking to see how far it is in time, and we're doing it. So the DCF, discounted cash flow, and the present value methodology, basically one and the same. They're just calling it two different things. So when you read the book, when they talk about DCF, when you look at the formulas, you're going to recognize that this is basically is what it is. So I've taken some screenshots. Like, for example, from page 62, I've taken like maybe a couple of pages just to kind of get you the feel for where the material is. But overall, I think you should obviously read it. So here, if I go down and look at that page, so what it says, I'll just read it, basically maybe underline it a little bit, that the principle underlying DCF valuation methodology is simple, basically on and on and on. And what you're really looking for, the enterprise value, also called, typically we'll call EV, enterprise value, or you can think of it as the price of the business, how much would you pay for the business, which is the enterprise value, or the price of the business is one and the same thing. So here that obviously talking about in that page is that we have to take the cash flows of the periods, cash flow 1, cash flow 2, so on, it continues, and we are dividing it by 1 plus discount rate R, and obviously we're raising it to the end. So this basically they're kind of describing the methodology that you have done, applied when you're looking at the net present value. So now the thing that needs to be added to this conversation has to do with what is, I believe it's on the next page in the book, and that is where they're talking about, they said, okay, if you have a business, quote unquote healthy ones, basically they're healthy in the sense that they will continue to survive and they will continue to operate forever, there is no set termination or liquidation date, which means we assume they're going to continue forever. So the question is to say that if you go back and think of Max Inc., we did the analysis where we had done the forecast for 10 years. But the question is, what do we do about this business, and how will we figure out the value of this business after the 10th year? And so this is where the terminal value conversation starts to come in play. So the terminal value, again, the book is the estimate of the price at which you can sell the business at some future date. So the keyword is the future date. The most common way to estimate a terminal value is to assume that the company will eventually mature, which means that it will not continue to grow at the growth rate a business is growing, obviously in the first few years like the Max Inc. does, and eventually reach a moderate, steady state growth rate. Basically, it's get to the point that it's going to grow with overall economy, and a good number for assuming the growth rate once the business is mature is probably 3% in the United States, because that's on average what the economy is growing. So that's what they're trying to bring it in here. So what I'm going to do, obviously, I'm going to talk about this and then kind of go and talk about how will we apply it to the Max Inc. conversation. So continuing with this, here. So here, what they are basically bringing us and explaining to us is to say, okay, how do we calculate the terminal value? Remember, the terminal value they're talking about the value in the future. So what it basically means is that if you have a business, let's say we're talking about Max Inc., right? So if I draw a graph, right? So we're starting with Max Inc. with no sales, a brand new business, and so sales and profitability and the cash flow. So let's say we were drawing cash flow for Max Inc., right? If I was looking at the graph of cash flow. So obviously the cash flow was negative in the first year or so, and then it starts to become positive and it grows quite a bit. But then what's going to happen is, so now here we are at about the 10th year of the business. This is where we stopped our analysis. So it grew pretty fast. You can see it grew pretty fast. So the growth rate was much faster as a business you would expect to grow from nothing to something. But after that period, it will basically grow more at a mature stage. So instead of growing, let me just change the color of the pen. Instead of growing at this pace, which is pretty steep, after a while, it's going to start to slow down and will grow, but at a much more steady state. So if you want to know what the terminal value be at this point, which is the 10th year, where this thing is going to grow at some steady state, we use this formula. This is the formula that is what we use, which is in the book. And so here the CT is going to be the cash flow that we have calculated in the 10th year. So at this point, the cash flow that we calculated is the CT, or in this case 10th year. The word T basically means time. Sometimes you will see N instead of T. So we're looking to see what is the terminal value, where T, which is the time, is N, which is the 10th year. We take the cash flow for the 10th year. Next thing we do is we multiply this by 1 plus G. So G is something new that we have not talked about it. You have not talked about it, but obviously when you read this chapter, you probably know what it is, and I'm guessing all of you have done your research from this point on, but just a refresher. G is the growth rate of the business that we expect, which will grow forever at some constant rate. And because it is at a maturity stage, it would be prudent to assume that the growth rate, of once a business is mature, to grow maybe about 3%. Okay, so that would be 3%. Okay. So what basically it means is that at this point right here, at the 10th year, if I want to know the terminal value at that point, in the 10th year, I would take the CT, which is the cash flow from the business model in the year 10, whatever the number is. G, we will assume to be 0.03, which is growth rate of 3%. Okay. R is what we calculate, the discount rate, which is after you've done your WACC plus added some risk factor, whatever that is. And for the example I'm going to give you, I'm going to use an R of 15%. And obviously you would use it for whatever R you would calculate. But just to kind of show you the methodology, I'm going to assume R to be 15%. So before I go to the next slide, punchline over here is this, that over the time, the cash flow of the business grew at a much faster pace because it's a growth business. After a while, obviously, it is slowing down. And then in order to figure out the terminal value at time t, or time n, in this case using t, which is the 10th year because we're going to calculate the terminal value 10th year, we'll take the cash flow for that year, which is the 10th year, 1 times 1 plus g, which we're assuming to be a mature growth rate growing at the economic growth rate of United States, which is about 3% on average. R is your discount rate, and G is the growth rate again, and that's the formula we will be using. So if I go to the next slide now, on the next page now, okay, take this and kind of put it together. So here is how the methodology kind of works out. So here we have, again from the book, so when I'm sure you've read it, I'm sure for many of you this is not new knowledge, but for some of you, I believe it is. Looking at your assignments, you did not do the terminal value part. So the enterprise value, which is the value of the business, again, or the price of the business, is going to be a function of the discounted cash flow we are doing, and then adding the terminal value right here. Now remember something what they're doing over here. The terminal value is calculated from the prior page. And then they are dividing that terminal value that we calculate from the formula that I had shown you. Let me just kind of show it to you again so you can, just to kind of tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this formula right here. This formula is TV, in the 10th year. So over here, they calculate the TV and putting it on the top. But then they are dividing it by 1 plus R raised to N, which in this case is 10th year. And the reason they are doing that is because we are calculating the value of the company 10th year from now. If I want to know what is it worth today, I will have to calculate the present value or basically discount it, okay? So in summary, if you have a business that, if I'm looking at the cash flow like we were talking about over here, negative cash flow grew, and it goes to a certain pace, and after that the business is kind of mature, and from that point on the business is growing at a more steady state, more like a 3%. In that case, we will calculate the business value in 2 steps. First step will be we're going to calculate the business value of from here to here, which is the 10 years that we have. That will basically be the net present value of the business, okay, using the cash flow analysis for year 1 through 10 that we have already know how to do it, which is your NPV. From the point that is beyond that period, which is in this more steady state condition the book talks about, in that case we use this formula to calculate this piece, and then we add it up. So let's see how it would look like for Max Inc. So the Max Inc. This is your cash flow that we have had calculated, and as you may recall that and again I'm here just to kind of keep the numbers straight. Here I am using the R to be 15%, and again you would use R whatever you come up with your calculation, but just to methodology, I want to show you the methodology. So the R is 15%. Here is a growth rate G. Okay, here I'm assuming 3%, which is pretty nominal for a United States growth rate. So now that we have the formula, if I calculate the terminal value, again the formula that we have in the book using this formula, the terminal value that I will get, which basically is I'm taking the CT from year 10, which is this number over here. The cash flow from year 10 is a CT. Okay, G is 3%, and R is, in my case, 15%. If I do the math, which means if I take 7907, this number, and plug it into this formula, the TV or the terminal value I will get is going to be 5987475. That's what I will get. But because it is way out there, I have to discount it and bring it to the today's value. In order to do that, I have to take the number that we have calculated, which is this number 59875, and put it on the top as an X so I don't have to write all those digits. So this is 59875 number, and I would divide this by 1 plus R, which in my case I'm using 15%, 0.15, and I'm going to raise it to 10. When I do that, I would get this number right here, 1480012. Okay, so this is a typo over here. I'll just ignore it. This should say NPV value from year 2014. So this should be 2014 to whatever the 2024. So this thing over here that we had calculated before when you did part C, which is the net present value of the business. This was the 1779. What is this? This is the net present value of the business when we did the NPV for this analysis that we have done. That's the net present value we came up with. But from this point on, what is going beyond that, we need to calculate the terminal value and add it back in. So, in summary, the business valuation for a business which has got a growth rate like this and then it slowly matures is done in 2 steps. The first step is you're going to calculate the net present value. You're going to calculate the net present value for this business, okay, which we have done as a 179785. Then you're going to use this formula right here, and using the year 10 cash flow, we're going to calculate the terminal value using this formula right here, and we will get 59875. But because it is way out in the 10th year, we're going to discount it and we're going to get 1480. So using the DCF method, the value of the business will be 3259591. So I hope this is helpful.